And welcome back, friends, to Coaching with the Bible. This is episode 140, season 3, episode 31, the beginning of the fourth book of Moses, the book known as Numbers, in Hebrew known as Bamidbar. The portion of the week is known as Bamidbar. We pick up the story of the people of Israel in the desert as they continue on the journey to the Holy Land, to the land of Israel. It's also the reading of the last chapter of the Ethics of the Fathers, chapter 6, known as the chapter on how to acquire Torah knowledge, how to become a scholar. Super interesting. We're going to focus in on that. First, in just a second, take a moment of gratitude to appreciate today on the calendar, in the Hebrew calendar. Today is the anniversary of the reunification of the city of Jerusalem as the eternal capital of the Jewish people during the Six-Day War in 1967. That is on this Hebrew date. In the English date, it's the beginning of June. In the Hebrew date, that would be today. And so I want to take a moment of gratitude and appreciation to be able to live at a time like this, to be able to live in the country where that took place, to have the opportunity on an almost daily basis or really any time to go there and be there. It is a gift and a dream, and it's something that I don't take for granted, nor do I take lightly. It is also the date for me personally, as a personal date on the Hebrew calendar, the date on which I lay tefillin for the first time in the period just before my bar mitzvah. I'll say this out loud, 35 years ago. So that was a very special day. My parents turned it into an even more special day. It was already the day, Jerusalem Day, but they turned it into a day of personal celebration. It's a day I mark really every year, and I remember every year as I do that exercise in the morning before prayer, putting on the tefillin in the morning. So those two things sort of set me in motion today. Our topic today is mastery. I'll admit it, I aspire to be a master. Exactly at what subject, that's the part I'm still working on. But mastery as a concept is, I think, exceptionally powerful and extremely important. It is sort of the point at which we maybe set our North Star to with respect to something specific in our life. If we're an athlete, then we're looking at some sort of mastery in our sport. If we're an artist, then we're looking at some level of mastery in our craft. We're hoping, we're praying, we're dreaming, we're striving to be considered and viewed as a master of our craft. That when other people watch us, it's a masterpiece at work. It's a piece of art when the person is playing the instrument, painting the picture, shooting a basketball. So mastery is very important. And the 6th chapter of the Ethics of the Fathers is essentially about mastery. How does one become a master at Torah? That's the specific focus. How does one, the language in Hebrew is the term is called kinyan, which is an acquisition. The idea being, how does one acquire that level of Torah knowledge, of Bible scholarship? How does one become a master in that space? So it's also not an accident, but certainly not simply convenience either, or a coincidence, that the reading of this chapter and the study of this chapter comes in the week before the holiday of Pentecost, the holiday known as Shavuot in Hebrew, which is the anniversary of the revelation on Sinai, where God gives the 10 Commandments and teaches the Torah to Moses, who then teaches it to the people. That revelatory moment for all the people is coming up in a week's time. And so those things are obviously correlated and related and connected to each other. And so we're thinking about what that is. And when a person begins to approach the list, because there is a list, the text describes 48 ways that a person can acquire Torah knowledge, can become a scholar. 48 ways. Not one or the other, but it's the collective of those 48. And when one looks at the list of the 48, you sort of begin to realize what's going on here. It's not just an intellectual exercise. It's not just a perfection of character. It is a mixture of many things we've actually talked about in Coaching with the Bible. It's a mixture of all things that matter with respect to a person becoming a master. And it's a fascinating list. When we look at it in the context of someone looking to become a master in whatever it is, perhaps this is a guide for them. Among the things that are in that list are the obvious. Study, love of study. Having an understanding and an intelligent heart. Minimizing pleasure. Minimizing preoccupation with worldly matters. Appreciating one's own portion currently in the world. Love of God. Love of being upright, of kindness. A person who loves truth, a person who leads with peace. A person who's willing to ask and answer questions. A person who's willing to listen to others teach him. A person who's willing to argue and be defeated, essentially, who's willing to listen to the arguments and the opinions of others. A person who's constantly sharing the words and the wisdom of others, quoting it in their name, in fact, which is the last one on the list. And so you see that it's a mixture of disciplines, both in the spiritual realm, in the physical realm, because there are minimizations taking place, persons sort of depriving themselves of certain pleasures in the world. There's a spiritual dimension in terms of refinement of character and person. And over the course of the mix of these efforts, a person approaches mastery. And so it's a fascinating list. It's worth full study and review. There's a great work by Rabbi Noach Weinberg, the founder of a place called Eish HaTorah. It's a wonderful yeshiva in the old city of Jerusalem. It's a series on the 48 ways, but it's applicable really to anything in life and everywhere in life. So it's that which is what I'm thinking about and what I'm sort of driving at. The reality of biblical scholarship and becoming a master of Bible scholarship is that it doesn't require, it doesn't lean on, is not incumbent upon someone's heritage. It does not depend on their lineage. It's not particularly connected necessarily to their DNA. It very much has to do with effort. It's something that everyone can acquire. It's something that everyone can attain. And so it reminded me when I was preparing for today of something we discussed, I think, in the first year of Coaching with the Bible, when we talked about grit. We talked about it in other places as well, is this idea of what does it take to become a master? What does it take to hit peak performance? And the work of Professor Anders Ericsson, who wrote the book called Peak. The idea of how it is that a person becomes a master. And so there's thinking in there, what does it take in actuality for us to master anything? How do we get to that space? What do we have to do to become a master really at anything? It's not true that if we just practice, that we'll become a master. That's not accurate. There is a methodology. There is a process that a person can, with the right level of discipline, can approach mastery and get to where it is that they want to be. And so here's the thinking and the statements and the logic and the ideas from Anders Ericsson in his book called Peak. Because then appreciate that, look, we're not focusing here necessarily on perfecting ourselves and self-mastery of ourselves. It's a great quote from Da Vinci. One can have no smaller or greater mastery than mastery of oneself. That is true. But that may be beyond the scope of where we're at the moment. Here, if I'm simply just want to be a master in a specific domain of work, leading my team in my own craft and my own interests, whether that's Bible scholarship, that is, some other area of study, or that's a physical craft or physical skill or a hobby, whatever that may be. So let's focus in there, because I think that's really powerful. There's a great quote from Peter Senge. Peter Senge He's a professor at MIT, but also has written on many, many other subjects on learning and organizations. Personal mastery is the discipline of continually clarifying and deepening our personal vision, of focusing our energies, of developing patience, and of seeing reality objectively. It doesn't happen immediately. It doesn't happen in an instant. And it continues to always require further and further refinement. It doesn't necessarily mean that we come with physical gifts, although we can't correct for height or weight or speed in some cases with respect to athletics. But our ability to put out the effort, again, not just simply practice, but we'll talk about a specific kind of practice in just a moment, gets us into a position where peak performance, peak level of success is all possible. And so here's Erickson's sort of structure in the book called Peak, which is this. Number one, adaptability. Appreciate that we all have equal measure of adaptability, that in his work, in his study, in his research, he did not see that a certain kind of person or a certain person from a certain background had more adaptability to any skill or task than anybody else. Again, the single sort of variation was obviously like height. But generally speaking, our ability to adapt to anything and to learn new skills and to become great at something seemed to be an equal measure for everyone. And so we shouldn't sort of view it and look at somebody who's great at something, who has become a master, and say, well, they're born with gifts. The gifts, they're different, they're separate, they're special, I'm not them. Professor Erickson did not seem to agree that that was true. That's number one. Number two comes into the space of practice. This is the key component in terms of the work itself. There are different kinds of practice, and he describes three kinds of practice. There's naive practice, which is simply just a person, let's say it's basketball, as an example. They just sort of go out and shoot a basketball for an hour a day. They don't really think about it. They don't put in a specific kind of focus. They're not working on a certain skill. They just go and do, and there's this hope that that'll be enough. That's naive practice. It does not work. On the other extreme, and I'll explain why I'm going to the other extreme in just a second, is deliberate practice. Deliberate practice is sort of the highest form of practice. That's the practice that's very specific, typically speaking, to experts already or athletes in specific, as an example, who have an objective measure that exists already that they're trying to approach and to achieve. So it's becoming the best basketball player in the world. If you're a musician, becoming the greatest violinist in history, things like that. And so there's an objective measure or standard that exists. What does it mean to be the solo violinist at the New York Philharmonic? I'm just making that up. So that's like a different level. But for most of us, the practice that he is describing is what's called purposeful practice. Purposeful practice is what gets us to improve. Purposeful practice has sort of four parts to it. You have a goal, so you're trying to reach something. So if you're running, you want to hit 5K, 10K, something like that. You're focused, so it's not just sort of mindless. So there's a focused effort that's going on towards that goal. You seek and appreciate feedback towards that goal. So now you're looping back. So I have a goal. I have my focused effort towards that goal. I'm now seeking feedback on the work that I've done towards that to get better. And perhaps the most important is appreciation that it's going to require getting out of my comfort zone. Comfort zone is something we talked about in the second week of Coaching with the Bible when we talked about Noah. But it's in that space of struggle and discomfort that most of my improvement's going to happen. That's how I grow. That's how I gain. That's how I move into the space that's closer to where I want to be, closer to what's maybe considered mastery for me. That's beyond my comfort zone. That's where the struggle lives. And it's okay to be in that struggle. That's where failure lives to a large degree as well. Sort of the effort that we're trying to put out is an effort that doesn't blow us out of the water, but it's an effort that perhaps at the beginning we'll continue to fail at, quote unquote, but ultimately, as we continue to turn the knobs and the levers of our practice, we improve, and our stride gets better if we're running, or our stroke as an artist gets better on the canvas because we're paying attention to the feedback from others. So it might require taking on a coach or working with someone who is an expert and having them refine the tools and the methodology that we're employing to actually get better. That approach to practice is the ultimate. So in the Bible, or in the Ethics of the Fathers, when it's talking about a person acquiring a level of knowledge, it's study, it's then review, it's bouncing that off of someone who is more knowledgeable, more years, more experience, refining, retooling, going back at it further. All of those things get you to a better place with respect to your practice, which ultimately gets you to a better place with respect to the mastery that it is that you seek. The third part of Erikson's methodology towards peak, so first was adaptability, second is practice. The third thing here is what he described as mental representations or mental reps. The greats, the masters, already sort of have in their mind what every situation looks like, because they've done so much practice already. They put in so much time and effort already, and so they can see the construct as it's going. If you saw the show, The Queen's Gambit on Netflix with respect to chess, I think this is sort of the idea. I forget the player's name, but she had the ability in her mind and then visually in the screen on the ceiling to see all the pieces moving. And so when someone brought in a different possibility, or she was defeated by an opponent, she was able to work through the mental representation in her mind to get better and to change and to improve. So her ability to work through the neural pathways in her mind, but also to see the constructs and layer one construct over another and to see how that was different, how that changed. And then the ability to then synthesize the new construct. That's an incredible power of mental representation. We don't even see that because it's happening in someone's mind. So if it's a great athlete or a great artist, or a great chess player or a scholar, it's a synthesis that's taking place in their mind. They're working through meshing the new information and overlaying it and integrating it with old information, and then they're getting better. And you're thinking, wow, how do they do that? Well, that's over years and years of practice. The fourth thing he mentions here is that the 10,000 hour rule is not a rule. He can say that because he's the one who did the research that led to Malcolm Gladwell popularizing the idea of a 10,000 hour rule. It's not exactly accurate. There's a lot of hours involved, and if you want to read the research, you should. It was clear that the people who had achieved the most had also practiced the most, but they had also practiced, it would appear, equal or measure or more to the other groups that were below them combined. So they're putting in more deliberate and purposeful practice by leaps and bounds above someone else, but not specifically a 10,000 hour number. That's a great number and it's catchy and it works. It's not exactly accurate, but it does require a lot of practice. And the last thing that Erikson mentions is this idea that we are, of course, known as Homo sapien, but he has another term for us, which is Homo exercen. A Homo exercen is a person based on the idea that human beings as optimists also have the belief that we can actually improve, that we can actually change, that we can have the mental effort that then impacts our physical effort to make us better because we want to be better. That's not clear in the other spaces and species in the living world. We perhaps don't know, and I certainly don't know. I'm not a scientist in that way at all. But the idea that we have this idea of exercise, quote unquote, or what he calls practicing man towards improvement, again, whether that's refinement of the spirit, refinement of the person, scholarship, physical abilities, what have you, in terms of leading towards mastery, that's unique to who we are in the universe in terms of living species. And so what you have then is this sort of really powerful construct that he describes that helps us understand what it takes to become a peak performer, what it takes to become a master. But I'll add in one thing which I think is super important here, which is this. Start super small. There's this idea that we want to achieve big things. And achieving big things, you have to think big and act small. Act small doesn't mean that you should be a small person. It means that the actions and the movements that you make should be small movements and small actions. They might not even be noticeable by other people. But by acting small, acting in the small, and getting the short, small wins, they add up. We talked about this many, many times before. So, and in that space also there's a clear goal. This is a step towards that goal. I want to hit that interim goal, let's say. I'm going to do that. That's where the feedback comes in. Now I'm going to loop. So I'm going to go now, next one, loop back, feedback. And in that space, I'm going to go through my struggles. It's a productive struggle. That's a great term, I think, also called a productive struggle that helps us learn. It helps us journey through our process and go bigger and deeper in terms of our learning. And then ultimately, that's how we grow. That's how we get to being a master. So we have sort of this idea here that I'm describing for you. If this is something that you're seeking to be a master at, you want to become better at X. So define what X is in real terms, probably even write it down. Then, as we've discussed before with goal setting, define the big goals, and then under each of the big goals, the smaller goals. So there's goal 1, which is the big one. Then under 1, there's 1A, 1B, 1C, 1D. What are those mini goals? Work on one of them. Struggle through it. Practice through it. Get to the other side of it. Accomplish it at a certain level. Feedback loop over it. Check in with others. Move on to the next one. And as you begin to build over and over and over again, you find yourself getting to a construct that's extremely powerful and ultimately leading towards mastery, which is what we're seeking here. So I think there's a lot here, obviously. And there's so much more, obviously, to talk about with respect to a person seeking mastery. If you're looking to become a master at something and you want to work it through, I am happy to have that conversation with you and happy to work with you on setting that structure and putting that structure in place for you to approach mastery, to think about how it is that you get to mastery, to think through what it is that Anders Ericsson, I got that backwards, is trying to approach and understand in helping you get to peak performance and helping you get to the place of master, whatever context, or whatever construct, whatever place that is. And I'll end with a quote. This is a quote from Robert Greene. Robert Greene has written a number of very well-known books. There's one book on power, another book, I believe, on passion, and one on mastery. And it's usually like X number of laws of power. So I think it's the 48 laws of power, stuff like that. So he has a quote on mastery. Mastery is not a function of genius or talent. It is a function of time and intense focus applied to a particular field of knowledge. I think that's right in the heart of what we're talking about today. And right near really where we need to be thinking when it is and as it is that we're trying to approach and consider mastery for ourselves. That is Coaching with the Bible for this week. Look forward to seeing you next week as we go deeper into the book of Numbers. Those of you who are celebrating today, the Jerusalem Day, happy holiday today. Those of you celebrating next week, we'll talk about it more next week. But happy Shavuot, happy celebration of the holiday of Pentecost, happy celebration of the revelation at Sinai, and everyone else, of course. Have a great week. Look forward to seeing you next week.